On September 27, 1893, the most devastating hurricane to ever hit the United States made landfall over Grand Isle and Cheniere Caminada. The night before the storm, there were 2,000 people living on Cheniere, but by the next morning, only around 800 were still alive. This caused a migration of survivors to scatter farther north. Plenty settled in Cutoff and Leeville along Bayou Lafourche, but another large group of these refugees settled in Salaville. Some of these new settlers would only be temporary, but other families still living in Westwego today can trace their lineage to survivors of that exact storm. In fact, most people can hear a similarity of the accents between the West Bank and Grand Isle and Cheniere. To accept this large group of refugees, Pablo Sala sold inexpensive empty lots along Sala Avenue. And within a year, 20 Cheniere refugee families called Salaville home, with more coming each month, since they could continue their seafaring professions to Grand Isle via the Westwego and new Harvey Canal. Pablo Sala would also convert the Seven Oaks plantation into a tourist destination and resort called Columbia Gardens, which is one of the first major instances of converting antebellum plantations into tourist attractions. He would die before seeing it complete though, and his sister Maria Sala y Fabreguesa would take over in his wake. Maria added more property towards Bayou Signet and made way for even more people to settle. By 1899, the population of Westwego and Salaville were about 500, and these weren't your typical New Orleanians either. This population was made up mostly of Cajuns, Creoles, and Africans, with much of that population increase either directly or indirectly attributable to the Cheniere hurricane. This brought coastal folklife and traditions to the greater New Orleans area and made Sala Avenue the region's cannery row, which was home to seafood processing, canning, packing, and distribution industries, all of it. Now, unfortunately, Westwego is no stranger to a very common enemy in Louisiana history, and if you've been watching this channel for a while, you probably already know what I'm about to say. The Durac-Terrebonne Fishermen's Exchange building is now the home of the Westwego Historical Museum. But only a few houses down, a guy named Alidor Guidry awoke to the smell of smoke. Right before dawn on April 14, 1907, Alidor rushed out of his apartment as it succumbed to the flames that were fed by northeasterly winds. Like the vast majority of Louisiana towns at the time, Salaville homes were all wooden, which fueled the fire that was now sweeping down Sala Avenue. Panicked residents formed a bucket brigade to put out the flames since there were few resources available to stop a wildfire. Horse-drawn fire engines arrived via the Walnut Street ferry from New Orleans, but the damage had been done. By noon, 42 buildings were burned to the ground, including the town hall, church, schools, numerous businesses like the Fishermen's Exchange, and 600 people, some of whom fled the hurricane-ravaged Cheniere, were now homeless again. This event would be known as the Westwego Fire of 1907, and such a blaze hadn't been seen since the Great Algiers Fire of 1895, but the community rebuilt. Louisiana people are objectively resilient and are widely known to not be held down long. Now, the homes were reconstructed and the cannery industry recovered. The True Vine Baptist Church is the oldest place of worship in Westwego. This church was founded by free men of color and is where generations of descendants of the enslaved populations from the Zerang plantation congregated to worship since 1898, with services being held at the home of Martin Tilton on Sala Avenue since 1865. With new technologies and advancements, Westwego would go full industrial along the river in the 20th century with large grain elevators dotting the landscape across the entire West Bank. Unfortunately, these would also be subject to tragedy and despair. 2 days before Christmas, December 23, 1977, the Continental Grain Elevator exploded in a fiery inferno. It would also cause a concrete tower to collapse on a nearby office building, killing 36 people and injuring at least 11 others. The workers were gathered in that office celebrating a Christmas party. Now, it's believed that the explosion was caused by grain dust that ignited. Once the explosion occurred, it was like a domino effect for the falling silos as one after the other leaned on the one next to it. Other explosions would occur in the 2-year span, which would eventually lead to new regulations to prevent dust ignition explosions. The West Bank grain explosion is still the deadliest grain elevator accident in world history. Despite the numerous trials and tribulations, Westwego still has its historical charms and locations just perfect for a weekend visit. Grab a bite at a local restaurant and tour the Westwego Historical Museum, or take a walk by the Lazy River Landing, which we are right now, and you can see the Crescent City right on the other side of this mighty Mississippi. Now, we couldn't bring you this information without your support on Patreon, and we'd like to thank all those who have already contributed and encourage anyone watching this video right now to consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/LouisianaDread. Now, for more Louisiana history, horror, folklore, and culture, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm Kyle Crosby, and this is Louisiana Dread Quick History.